So I guess one of the most obvious things for me is simply the data. It hits you right between the eyes just how significant this issue of women and women's empowerment is in achieving any kind of development outcome. Is it all right? But seriously, the data is quite compelling, and it's pretty hard to go past it if you spend any amount of time, worrying about how to do your job well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key thing for us at this stage is how do we actually respond to that through a credible research program that makes a difference in agricultural development. And that's where moving from just integrating and mainstreaming gender into our research and now pursuing a gender transformative approach is really going to get at some of the fundamental barriers. And if I think about it, as a bald white male, many of my drivers around this go back to my childhood and teenage years as a
bald white male,
as a family of Irish immigrants in the UK, where you do get a particular sensitivity to minorities and inequality, and I think that's reflected in my work in development. Having said that, it's only really hit home for me in the past 5 years or so, just how inadequate many of the approaches to gender have been, and that's why I think that what we're doing just now, what the CRPs are doing, provide a great opportunity to change the way in which the CG system does it, because here we have institutionalized systematic support for making a change, not the more piecemeal approach that's been the case in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't claim to have that kind of depth of personal impact, but a couple of things really kind of almost pre-adapted me, I think, for taking this seriously. And they're silly little stories, but I still kind of come back to them. And one of them was my mum. When we were about 12, my family made quite a brave decision to actually move out of a small house and buy a much bigger house and set up a guest house. And I remember after about a year and a half of that, my mum saying to me one day, this is the first time I've really had my own money. And that kind of, even at 12 or 13, that really jarred with me. And I think that, and a couple of other incidents, make that realisation that, and the discomfort I had with a lot of gender research, which just seemed to be research, translating that finally into, okay, let's understand and then think about what that means for how one intervenes.
I think you hit on a really important issue, though, and I think one of our challenges, speaking for the CG as a whole, is how do we build on this to have a truly systemic impact across the system. Because it is very noticeable that when you have a meeting on gender, we have something like 25% of the participants are men, and 75% of the participants are women. So it does become seen as being, or there's a real danger that it's seen as a women's issue. Whereas if you go to many of the leadership meetings of the CG in inverted commas, you're doing pretty well if you just get the reverse of those figures. And so one of the things I think we have to try and do is to find ways of helping people to get it, whether it's through more of these sorts of stories, or somehow or other more of these life-changing experiences, because I think it's only through that people are going to make the sorts of psychological commitments to really driving change that are required to ultimately win the battle.
Yeah, somehow or other you've got to kind of pull that trick of shifting in people's minds the, I know I ought to care about this and I should care about it, and so I do, and I'll support it, to something much more kind of visceral and systemic that says, actually, this is just what you need to do to make a difference. And it, in all of its, in a curious sense, it almost makes it obvious and not special, rather than separate and precious.
Absolutely.
And I'm not even sure I articulated that right, but there's something about that, I hesitate to say mainstreaming, but it becoming much more of a systemic part of the way we do business in a much more sustained way.
We have to get to a stage where talking about gender is nothing special. It is an integral part of what we do. It's the way we do business.
Yeah. And I guess that's about lining up the internal how we do things, what we value, what we expect of how we talk about issues on a day-to-day basis in our own work, and aligning that with the broader thrust of that transformative gender approach, so that, yeah, I guess it's like anything else. You have to line up your ducks in a row and make it all drive to the same result. Unless you do that, it's not going to be part of the way we do things and the way we think about things.
Yep. And I think one of the ways of actually doing that is, and it's a particular interesting challenge for I think both of us, but in particularly you as the Director General of a centre, it's how do we actually create incentive systems within the centre to actually reward the sorts of behaviours that we're looking for, because I think we are looking here at fairly profound behavioural change for a lot of us, and I think the more encouragement that we can see for that through performance management plans and that sort of thing, the more rapid and the more profound the changes will be that we'll see.